Hello everyone, and this is a review of the philosophy book, 6 Names of Beauty by Crispin Sartwell. Now this book came out in 2006, and I originally read it for a class I took on the philosophy of art, and I was just rereading some of it now, and I figured I would share it with the world and share it with those who are not aware of it if they are interested. So, this book is interesting in a variety of ways. Now, first of all, his writing style is very unique, at least in this book. I have not read his other work, but essentially each chapter is about a cultural version of beauty, or a culturally informed idea of beauty. And Sartwell tries to convey that meaning in a series of almost aphorisms, but they're also paragraphs. So each chapter will have, say, like 10 or 11 or 12 different little sections that can be read independently and in any order. So they are really, in a way, like aphorisms. It's like reading some of Nietzsche's aphorisms and saying that this is not a book you can easily just open up and easily digest. This is a book where you look at one of these sections and you study it for a while, and he's not exactly trying to be analytic here. He's simply trying to convey some vague notion of what these culturally informed ideas of beauty are. So he starts with the English version of beauty, which I believe he considers something like desire. He talks a lot about sexuality and I believe the human body in female form, but he also talks about the Sanskrit term sundara, which is a bit more complicated and harder to explain. It's probably one of the hardest concepts to explain out of the 6 names of beauty that he has taken. I would say a lot of it has to do with being in the right place at the right time and creating art that is for a greater purpose. Sundara is kind of something created with the idea of doing it for the right purpose. So he talks about how, I believe, although he's not religious, although he's not Catholic, he was in this Venetian church and he looked up inside the cathedral, and the beauty that he saw was Sundara, because it was created as a yearning towards God. And it's interesting because in this chapter, he also talks about Shaker art. If you don't know what Shakers are, they're a Protestant sect coming from England, and they became popular in the US. A lot of them practiced abstinence, but they created these very simple wooden pieces of furniture, similar to the Mennonites and the Amish. They're very traditional people. So he talks about like a chair created by the Shakers. And although it's very simple, it's nothing like the gaudiness you'd see in a Catholic church, he also described the chair as presenting Sundara because it had this yearning towards God, because the Shakers and a lot of Protestants, when they make or made furniture or any piece of anything, they kind of associated that with a divine quality. Of course, I could get into all these concepts a lot more, and I could talk about each of them for maybe half an hour, but I will move on. Also, the Navajo concept of Hoto, which is kind of an all-encompassing, I think it's kind of similar to Sundara because it's also about kind of knowing your place in the world and being connected to nature and to things around you. So Hoto is, again, it is knowing your place and knowing your context, I think. There's the Hebrew term Yafa, which I think is slightly more familiar, and this is kind of, it's basically like a glowingness. You know, Yafa is the beauty of gold. It is the beauty of the Catholic Church because of the ornate detail. It is of the moon because of its glow. The Japanese term of Wabi-sabi, which is actually 2 words, and Wabi-sabi is a kind of subtle humility. It's kind of a frailty. It's kind of the sentiment we put on to really frail, imperfect things. There's the ancient Greek tu kalon, which I think, as an American, I am most familiar with. It's kind of this ideal of rationality, symmetry, light, associating light with wisdom and broadening of horizons. It's about space. Maybe this is the most Indo-European version of beauty. But anyway, if any of those explanations sounded, too vague for you, then I would stay away from this book, because although he spends an entire chapter on each of these concepts, he is probably equally as vague. Although there's a lot to study within each paragraph, there's things to come back to. A lot of times you're like, well, what did Sartwell mean by this? Where did he get this idea? Why is he introducing it here? And so it is fun in that way. It's a challenge. It's something to come back to. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would pick it up. It's also fairly short. You could probably, if you wanted to read it in a few hours, you could, but I would suggest taking your time with it. Anyway, thank you. If you enjoyed this review, please consider subscribing to this channel as well as my main channel, where I talk about history and sometimes philosophy a little more in depth. Thank you.